Yes, well, I'm here with Graham, and we're going to talk to David Leyonhjelm in a moment, but I asked the Prime Minister last week whether his government should be doing a deal with Labor over renewable energy when a Senate inquiry was still being conducted into the regulation and governance of wind farms. Now, this inquiry was set up by Senator David Leyonhjelm from New South Wales. All government and most crossbench senators supported the motion, and they had their fifth public hearing last week. But the inquiry has heard horrific detail about the injurious impact on health of these hopelessly subsidised eyesores. Now, of course, when the Prime Minister agreed with me on air that they were eyesores and he wasn't happy with them, this led to all sorts of attacks on the Prime Minister and on me as being some kind of populist broadcaster. I would have thought the populist people in the media are those who slavishly adhere to renewable energy no matter what damage it's doing to anybody. I don't think I'm taking a very populist position here when I simply say the renewable energy target ought to be scrapped until we can answer the concerns and respond to the horrific detail about the injurious impact on health of these subsidised eyesores. Then only then should we proceed. Or are we saying that it's only Alan Jones and Senator Leyonhjelm and Graham Richardson and others who are concerned about the plight of the poor people living beside these things? As I've said many times, if they weren't injurious to health, put them on Bondi Beach, put them in Macquarie Street, put them on Parramatta Road, put them in Queen Street, Brisbane, put them on Collins Street in Melbourne, put them on top of Parliament House in Canberra. One woman wrote to me and she said, Alan, can you get the Federal Health Minister on air and ask her what she's personally going to do to stop the destruction of thousands of rural families because of excessive wind turbine noise and infrasound. These people are desperate, and Senator Leyonhjelm has spoken to many of them. He's with us in the studio in Canberra. David Leyonhjelm, thank you for your time. You've spoken to many of these people, haven't you?
Yes, I have. Yes, we've heard from lots of them as witnesses to the inquiry, and also they've put in written submissions in many cases.
You talked about a litany of planning ineptitude, government and industry indifference, your words, and people becoming sick in the homes they'd lived in for decades.
Yes. Well, look, in Victoria there's been this duck shoving backwards and forwards between local government and the state government. Who's in charge? The councils are responsible for enforcement, but the government approves the planning approval in the first place. The councils are mostly rural councils. They've probably only got one planning officer. They have no expertise in acoustics, any of the technical aspects that relate to wind turbines, so they're not equipped to do it. So that's planning issues. On the noise issue or the sound issue, we've had people give evidence to the inquiry who's told us they welcome the turbines into their area, they were in favour of renewable energy, they were pleased that they came in. We've had people with them on their farm as well. Within a little while of them starting up, the turbines start generating electricity, they start feeling sick. They originally, in the beginning, they say it can't be the turbines, but then after a while they think, I can't think what else it's going to be. They move away, they get better, they come back, they get sick again. Then they get told, it's not you, it's just people telling you funny things that, you know, you're sick in the head, more or less. It's nothing to do with the wind turbines. It makes them feel terrible. This has been going on for years and years and years. We even had one couple who, from South Australia, who had 19 turbines on their farm. They were being paid at, I think they told us, about $200,000 a year as hosts, and they said, we wish we'd never seen them or heard of them. We're just so sick of it. They had to move their house, or move out of their house. They just couldn't stay there any longer. And yet nobody takes them seriously. Everybody's saying, well, they're being told all the time, you know, you're really not sick. You're just imagining it. It's dreadful.
Can I ask, David, how did we get to this point? Because it seems to me, if you look at the history of wind power, it's been going on for a long time. It didn't start yesterday. Right across Europe, they seem to be adopting it. It's all over the place. Are they having the same problems? Because I never hear about them.
Yeah, they are.
Well, They are having some. It depends on the size of the turbines, it appears. The big turbines, 3 megawatts and above, seem to have more of an issue. Depends how close the people are to the turbine. So in a lot of places in the UK, for example, they're offshore, and Denmark, they're offshore. So there's some distance where people are living. Obviously the effect of it decreases the further they are away from it. It's complicated. We don't really know all the answers, obviously. There's a lot of things that we're still finding out. And one of the problems is that not everybody is affected by it. It's probably no more than 10 or 15% of the population. It seems to be a bit related to motion sickness, seasickness and air sickness. Although I don't think the same people who get air sick or seasick also get this affected by wind turbines, but it seems to be a similar sort of mechanism. I used to be a vet. Some of the explanations, so I understand a bit about anatomy and so forth, some of the explanations we've heard from people who know a lot more about it than I do make sense, that it's affecting either the middle ear or the inner ear, the infrandibular process. It just seems to sound logical. Now, there's a lot more work that's required. As I said, we don't know all the answers. There's more research required. The problem is there's this denial process going on. If this was any other industry, a bank or an investment or a coal mine or manufacturing, and people were saying, "You are making me sick." And suppose that industry said, "Well, we don't believe we are making you sick. We think that's not right." And the people kept coming back saying, "You're making me sick." I guarantee that all of those other industries would say, "All right, we've got to get to the bottom of this." Even though we're convinced that it's not us, we would spend the money and find out, do some research and prove these people wrong. The wind industry, big wind I call them, they just are in straight denial. No, you can't be sick. No, we're not going to release any data. No, we're not going to cooperate.
It's easy to deny, David Leyonhjelm, easy to deny if you've got the Energy Minister, McFarlane, in bed with these people. I mean, you are a Senator of the Federal Parliament, and you were quoted as saying that you'd met these people, and I quote your words, "They tell me they suffer from chronic sleep deprivation. Some also suffer sinus pressure, tinnitus, pains in the chest, headaches, nausea, vertigo." How the hell, when you are having an inquiry into all of this, can we then be passing legislation which is going to build 1,000 more of these in northwestern Victoria, and they're going to be built all over Australia, when this is the kind of evidence that has been given to the Parliament of Australia?
Yes, it's troubling. I mean, this new target, this 33,000 gigawatt hours, will potentially result in another 1,800 of these big turbines built all around Australia, and they've all got neighbours, of course, and it's inevitable there will be people getting sick. But can I tell you, Alan, since I appeared on your radio show, the Prime Minister was on your radio show, this inquiry is now at the stage of producing an interim report. We've been talking to Greg Hunt about our concerns. He wants to hear what we've got to say. And we also have a meeting with the Prime Minister tomorrow. A group of crossbenchers have a meeting with the Prime Minister tomorrow to discuss exactly this. Now, we're not going to be able to do anything about this new 33,000 gigawatt hour target. That's going to stay. Both Labor and the government is committed to that, so we have to be realistic. But I think what we can do is ask the government and expect that the government will take notice of our concerns, take notice of what sort of remedies, what mitigation can occur, so that at least fewer people, if not no people, are badly affected by the turbines that are going to be constructed.
These people can only survive, and most of them, I'm sorry, are foreign companies. Most of them are foreign outfits, and they're being subsidised by the people watching you now. I mean, it's staggering. Yeah. I mean, if they want to build a turbine, there are people watching you who run a greengrocer's shop, a dry cleaning shop. They don't get a cent in subsidies from the taxpayer. The wind turbine, foreign wind turbine owners are being subsidised. Oh, cut me out of it. I mean, how does this make sense?
Well, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. It's based on this idea that we need more renewable energy, that it's good to save the planet, to prevent climate change, all that sort of logic. That's the reasoning behind it. Now, if you accept all of that, then wind turbines are currently the cheapest way of producing renewable energy other than the existing hydro system. Now, so if you say, well, we need more renewable energy, then the answer that most people come to is, well, let's build more wind turbines. My view is that we should probably wait a little bit. Solar is catching up. New batteries are coming along, which will make solar an option for when the sun's not shining. It's a bit like wind, though. I mean, wind stops when the wind's not blowing. Solar stops when the sun's not shining. But new batteries are catching up. We could expand some of the hydro systems and provide a bit more renewable. And of course, there's a whole new raft of technology in nuclear too, which is zero emissions. It's very close to totally renewable. There's a new Canadian company, for example, that's producing these things right down to 20 megawatts, enough just for a town of 1,000, 1,500 people.
Well, that's only valid, of course. That's only valid if you believe that we should abandon coal-fired power. China are not abandoning coal-fired power. India are not abandoning coal-fired power. Germany are not abandoning coal-fired power. We are. But what is democracy? I'm lost here, because government of the people, by the people, for the people is obviously government of the people, for some people, because here are people who are refugees in their own home. And you said, you're quoted as saying, what disturbs me about this is that, as the inquiry has heard, wind farms are not required to limit or even monitor their infrasound emissions. And unless something changes, it's absolutely certain that tens of thousands of people who live within a few kilometres of these new turbines will become sick. Can someone tell me who is representing these people, or do we just abandon them and ignore them?
Well, that's the story to date. They've been discounted, discarded, rejected and told they're fools. We've got to do something about it. I think in practical terms, the thing to do is to have a proper monitoring process of all sound, infrasound as well as low frequency and audible sound, and put a limit on it and say, well, look, you can operate, and I am realistic enough. I'm no great fan of renewable energy when it has to be subsidised. I've got no problem if it doesn't need to be subsidised.
Quite.
But if we're going to be stuck with renewable energy, let's at least make sure it does no harm. Now, and in the case of wind turbines, put them where they're not going to do too much harm, and then monitor them so that when we get a good feel for what is causing people to get sick, we've got a measure of the noise that they're emitting. We know what the ceiling is. There's a threshold, obviously. It's not just any amount of sound. We can put a limit on it. If they go over that limit, we can say, OK, you've got to stop operating now. You've got to change what you're doing, change the design of your turbines, do something to them so that you're not emitting noise above a certain level. We've just got to start doing that. We're not even measuring in any of the planning guidelines infrasound.
And you describe their behaviour of the wind industry, your words, quote, completely callous. You said at a recent Senate hearing, one wind farm manager attempted to table a cartoon that lampooned the claims and suggested that senators colour it in.
Now, it's just absolute disdain for anyone who doesn't think renewable energy and wind turbine renewable energy isn't the best thing since sliced bread. You know, you're an evil person, you're a denier, there's nothing in your favour. You should see some of the abusive tweets and emails I've been receiving over this. They're just people who are quite fanatical. The funny thing is, as I was saying before, any other industry in this situation would say, well, even if I don't think there's any basis to this, at least investigate. These guys won't even acknowledge there's anything worth investigating. It's shameful.
Can I
One
ask
of
you,
these
David?
days there will be a massive Sorry?
Yeah, no, I just want to interrupt you.
One of these days there will be a massive...
Go on, finish up. Finish up.
There will be a massive class action one of these days. A massive class action, something similar to when big tobacco companies got sued over lung cancer. the denials that these big wind companies are offering today will be used against them in evidence in a court to prove, to establish, you were told, you had plenty of reason to believe you're causing harm to people, and in spite of all the evidence, and it's not conclusive, but it's good enough to for a court, I can tell you, they will be found liable for damage that they're causing.
Can I ask you then where this goes? Because it seems to me if the government and the opposition get together and set a renewable energy target, 2 weeks ago, I think it was pretty recently, they can't actually walk away from wind power. Without wind power, they can't get anywhere near their target, can they?
That's right. And even with wind power, I'd be surprised if they make 33,000 gigawatt hours.
So would I. But what is the attitude of the government and the opposition senators on your committee? What are they saying?
There's only one Labor senator on the committee. She's fairly enthusiastic about wind power. And I think Labor opposed the establishment of this this select committee that for which I moved the motion. I think they're basically believers in the renewable energy sector. The government is not 100% either way. I think Greg Hunt was probably fairly enthusiastic about the wind industry. As we heard from the Prime Minister on your show, Ian, he's no great fan of it. Neither's Joe Hockey, as I've heard. My meeting tomorrow with the Prime Minister and Mr Hunt will be interesting. I'm hoping we're not going to head off this 33,000 gigawatt hour target. We're not going to stop the turbines from getting built, but I am hopeful that they might take notice of me and the committee's findings that these noise problems, these sound problems have got to be measured, and there has to be a limit put on them so we can keep the sound below the level at which it causes people to get sick.
As you have said, whatever emerges from this inquiry, it's clear government and industry indifference towards people suffering because of their proximity to wind turbines must end. Will it? I mean, these poor people are stuck there. They're refugees in their own homes.
They are. They're refugees off their farms, in their own homes. Some of them can't live in their houses.
They can't.
It's a terrible situation for them. No. We really do have to do something about it. I mean, my view is that governments should be like doctors. First rule is do no harm, and in this case they're doing harm. It's got to stop. Irrespective of what I think about subsidising renewable energy and killing wedge-tail eagles and all those other things that I don't like about turbines, and I could say that other forms of renewable energy, apart from the subsidy bit, don't have those issues. But leave aside all of that, we have got to stop hurting people. That's the important thing.
Wonderful
That's rule number one.
Great stuff. Can I ask you a question slightly unrelated to this, though? I note today we've been talking about pensions, and Scott Morrison's got a deal going, and the Senate seems to be putting their hand up. What do you make of all that? What is your view on the idea that those at the lower end get extra money, $30, whatever it is, and those at the top end who've got 1.1 million in assets plus a home, they lose the pension? Well,
I'm broadly in favour of the idea of targeting the pension more towards poor people. There's this perception, I hear it all the time, that because I've paid taxes all my life, therefore I'm entitled to a pension.
Yes.
That's never been the case in Australia.
Absolutely.
We've never had that system.
Absolutely.
But there's an awful lot of people who think that, so they get very cranky when they think that they're going to lose eligibility for the pension. So I'm broadly in favour of what Scott Morrison is trying to do, which is to direct the pension more towards people who are poorer. But he's going about it in a rather cack-handed way. I said today, in fact I told him today, I'll vote for his bill, but I'll have to hold my nose while I'm doing it, because tapering, the assets test tapering, well, it's fine. It only takes into account assets outside the family home. So if you're a couple, they're going to lower the threshold, I think, from 1.2 to 800,000 or something like that, and that's fine. But you can still be living in a house worth $2 million while you're drawing that pension or part pension, and that pension is being paid for by somebody, including people working on $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 a year, paying tax, who don't have a house at all. Now, I don't think that's equitable in the least.
I think that's most for all.
So we have to find a way.
Yeah, I think that's most probably a debate for another day. We've run out of time. I just wanted to say, Graham, while Senator Leyonhjelm is here, you have done fabulous work for the intellectually disabled. There is a movement in this country that wanted to have legislation passed where the intellectually disabled would have to be paid at the same rate as you and everybody else, when in fact many of these people seek out of the work that they get for $2, $3, $4.80 an hour, the friendship, the excitement, the happiness, the collegiate nature of it all. You've articulated all of that, and thankfully the legislation has not succeeded in terms of allowing that appeal against the wages that they're being paid to succeed, and you've led a lot of that charge. It's to your great credit. I know out there parents of the intellectually disabled are very grateful for what you've done.
It's been my pleasure. I mean, compassion is genuine compassion, and some of these people who are opposing this sort of stuff pretend to be compassionate, but really they're not doing anybody any good, and I reject that approach. If you're going to help, you make it a practical benefit.
Good on you. Good to
Good
talk.
on you, David. Thank you very
David.
much for your time. David Leyonhjelm in Canberra, and we'll be back in just a moment.